in the Curzon Soho on a very rainy day. You're Peter Strickland. I'm Simran Hans. Hello.
Hello.
I want to start by asking you about going to the movies. When was the last time you went to the cinema?
The last time I went to a cinema was, when was it? June? I saw Top Gun Maverick, which I enjoyed in a weird way. It's not my cup of tea, but the sheer sweat and bravery and I don't know. It was a spectacle. I was just blown away by it. I was quite surprised. I enjoyed it. A friend dragged me there. I didn't enjoy the first one when I saw it in the 80s. But yeah, on a huge screen, it did the job. I didn't want my money back.
You didn't want your money back. That's always a good sign. How often do you go to the cinema?
These days, hardly ever. Post-lockdown, I think there was a whole glut of work I had to catch up on. I think I've been twice. The other film I saw was Lucille Halilovich's Earwig, another film, which is a spectacle in a very different way, which I really enjoyed. But no, when I was younger, I used to go a hell of a lot. Now I tend to watch DVDs. It's like the equivalent of having a cheese toasty. But you know, I think I realized when I was younger, it was a privilege of time, especially a privilege of proximity to cinemas, a privilege of money. Yeah, times have changed.
What age were you, would you say, when you were sort of going to the cinema the most?
I think between the ages of, in my late teens, throughout my 20s, when I lived in London, I'd go a hell of a lot. And also, I think, even before that with the Scala, they'd have double bills, triple bills, so you could see 3 films for a very cheap price. So yeah, when I lived in London, it was a very different time. I saw most of my film viewing was done then.
Tell me about the last cinema experience you had that really moved you.
I can think of one which is a long time ago, which was Dirty Dancing. I was very young.
Take us back to that day.
I was maybe 15, 16. And again, it's not my cup of tea, but I was just dragged along. I'm half Greek, so I used to go to Greece for the summers, and I went to this open air cinema, and it was absolutely rammed. People were sitting on the ground, people sitting on stairs by the projection booth. And the audience just went wild, especially towards the end with the whole climax. And yeah, it was really strangely euphoric. Had I seen it on television, it wouldn't have been the same. But yeah, that sense of community and, dare I say it, participation, which normally I wouldn't want in a film, it kind of worked for that.
Yeah, you make me want to rewatch Dirty Dancing just talking about it.
But yeah, I mean, other cinemas like the Scala was like a very obvious one for me. I think because the whole cinema was kind of falling apart. And the films they showed, the prints were very old, but tended to be quite disreputable films. So everything kind of connected, you know, the space you were in with the image you were watching. You had the Northern Line going underneath with this deep rumble. So that's when I really got a sense of atmosphere, really, more than narrative, by going to the Scala.
You talk about disreputable films, and that seems to be sort of a wealth of inspiration for your films and for your filmmaking. These sort of disreputable genres, trash, gore, sexploitation. Why do you think you're drawn to those kind of films?
I guess it's like when you're a tourist, you always want to find something which is off the beaten track, something that hasn't been discovered. And so I think back in the 90s, giallo was still very much a niche thing. I mean, now it's kind of almost she, but I remember going to this Mario Bava season at the National Film Theatre, which is now the BFI South Bank, in 1998. 2 months of Mario Bava, and I just kind of soaked it up. And the Scala used to show like these all-night Argento films, but I never went to those, but you know, you could read about them and get them on VHS. I think what they had, not just those Italian films, but also the sex films, I think maybe because the filmmakers had to deliver money shots, As long as they tick those boxes, they could do anything else they wanted in between. So then you find something which is really strange and personal and lyrical. And it kind of led to 70s porn, films like James Bidgood's Pink Narcissus, Wakefield Pool's Bijou, which are really, really unlike anything else. And it kind of comes from this tradition of filmmakers, especially in New York, who are making films in their own apartments, like the Kushar brothers, Jack Smith, creating these very fantastical worlds steeped in artifice, cheap artifice, coming from junk stores and thrift stores. And James Bidgood was a department store window dresser, stealing stuff from work and creating these, what Powell and Pressburger would have done had they had no money.
What's one film, it can be fiction or documentary, that changed your perspective on the world?
I mean, the obvious answer would be Eraserhead, only because a lot of it was to do with timing. I was 16. Prior to that, I'd seen films like Tom Cruise and Cocktail, and I was used to a certain type of cinema. And suddenly, there's this film which ignores narrative and amplifies all these sounds that most filmmakers try to delete, like the hiss of the radiator and so on. And I think prior to that, I think I'd seen sound was something that would illustrate an action. No matter how good or experimental the sound was, it was always illustrating what you would see on screen. And suddenly it was expressing a state of mind that completely changed my perception, really.
Do you remember that screening of Eraserhead?
I do, and I fell asleep as well, which kind of enhanced it, because your dreams kind of interact with the film. Whereas when you get older, my sleep is so heavy, nothing interacts. I just wake up and the film is finished. But before, when I was younger, you could kind of have this strange soaking between what you're watching and your sleep.
When you go to the cinema, where do you like to sit? Where's the best seat in the house?
I prefer the back. I don't know why. By an aisle in case I need to get out for some reason. I sat at the front once. I watched Climax, Gaspar Noé, because it was sold out and the only space was at the front. And I was on the verge of vomiting. It was with the camera work and everything. It was extraordinary, but I just couldn't take it at points. I thought, I just wish I'd been at the back.
And which film do you think you've seen the most?
Weirdly, probably some of the Scorsese stuff, like Raging Bull.
Why is that weird?
Taxi Driver. No, because I tend to prefer more, I think, stuff like Lynch. But yeah, I watched it quite young, and I just loved the editing in those films, the dialogue, the way he was working with actors.
And you revisit them often?
Not now. No, I haven't seen that film in years. But when I was younger, I watched it a hell of a lot. I mean, now I tend to watch a film once. That's it.
I like repeat watching, but I don't tend to do it very often. I feel like I'm always trying to watch new stuff and load up, you know?
There's no time, is there? When you get older, there's no time whatsoever.
So let's talk a little bit about your new film, Flux Gourmet. How would you describe the film?
I guess it's about our relationship to food, whether it's an artistic relationship or a bodily relationship, more on the dysfunctional side. But yeah.
That's so interesting to hear you describe it that way, because I would describe it as about our relationship to making art.
Okay, well that as well. Yeah.
But let's go with the food to start with. I'm wondering if there was something that kind of prompted you to build a film around stomach issues, around this kind of whole idea of holding in a fart.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was exasperation, to be honest. I think it was just, to my knowledge, I mean, I haven't seen many films recently, but to my knowledge, I'm not aware of anything exploring that, where so many people have not just celiac disease, but irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, which is a terrible thing to have, allergies as well, which is quite a different thing. But I think it came out of a frustration, and obviously I'm not going to, I think so much of it is context. I mean, of course, in the right context, you know, in the back of a class, a fart is great. But if you're suffering and it's chronic and there's this anxiety around it, and it leads to something more serious, then I think, you know, it's a hard one, but you know, how do you do it without being like this? You know, So I try to do it with a degree of lightness, but at the same time, if it's too light, people think I'm making fun of it. So it was a tricky thing with Makis to find that middle ground where we're not being too earnest or didactic, but not making fun of something quite serious. But I think with allergies, I'm as much as anyone, I was very ignorant. I didn't know much about it. And in quite a few films, it was anaphylactic shock was done as comedy, which to me is kind of strange because someone's about to die. Someone is kind of excluded from so much food that others can have. So really, it was kind of opening up a conversation, I think. And it tied in with taboo in art and performance art. And I've seen a lot of it's to do with excrement. You can go from Gigi Allen to a whole bunch of people, Carolee Schneemann, Cozy Fanny Tutti, the Viennese actionists, all dealing with bodily fluids in very, very different ways. But it felt, to me, quite liberating that we're dealing with a topic that people are very silent about.
Why do you think that is? Because this film, but also all of your films, none of them are really kind of squeamish about bodily functions. But why do you think they're still kind of treated as this taboo subject?
It depends which country you live in. In this country, people are very odd.
It's that thing of the British stiff upper lip, isn't it?
It's very the British are weird, even though I'm British myself. But yeah, in Europe you have a much more, especially in Scandinavia, people are much more relaxed about it. Yeah, I mean, I find it odd. I remember in my previous film, not here, but one particular censorship body had a huge issue with this menstrual blood tasting. And I was forced to make a cut to make a certain certificate. And obviously, if an individual has a problem, and I completely respect it, everyone has a very personal reaction to these things. But when a whole body tells the public what they can and can't see, I find it very odd when they can show very misogynistic violence, but something which is a natural bodily fluid, albeit in a sexual context, but still, I find it just strange. I find people so strange.
What can film do that some of the other artistic mediums that you've worked in can't?
Well, I think some of it is having a bigger audience. When you do a radio play, I don't know, it just kind of disappears. But I suppose film, I guess I've always thought visually, and I'm not musically talented at all. So the band, that was very much Tim and Colin, who it was the three of us together. I couldn't do it on my own. And that was something in between filmmaking, because I made a film in 16mm before that, and I was burnt out financially. So for the next 7 years, we were just doing stuff with sound, but kind of working in a similar way to how you would mix a film. But if I could, I would always go back to film.
Where do you see the future of cinema going?
Well, I'm hoping there are always going to be filmmakers, always going to be stories. I think the question is also how we can view films, and also about the past. I mean, I saw a Charlie Shackleton article in The Guardian quite recently about this whole thing of data migration, archiving, and yeah, I'm not anti-streaming at all. I think it's enabled a lot of people who can't afford to go to the cinema or who don't live near a cinema to see films. But you kind of want this parallel world where they both coexist, but you can feel, I sneaked into a FOP this morning and it's pretty quiet down there. But yeah, I guess we're facing a lot of questions about how we preserve film. But in terms of new film, it seems pretty healthy.
Thank you, Peter Strickland.
Thank you.